The first vibration ripped through the silence at 2:13 a.m., rattling the phone on my nightstand like a wasp trapped in glass. I blinked awake, throat-raw body aching from an 18-hour shift at the marshal's office. My muscles screamed for rest, but the glow of the screen carved through the darkness of my apartment, burning into my half-closed eyes. The text preview was short, almost casual, but every letter felt like a fist to my chest. "We sold your house. Don't overreact." For a moment, I thought my exhausted brain was hallucinating. Then another message popped up, the three gray dots pulsing like a countdown. It was for Victoria's wedding. She deserves a proper start. I sat upright so fast my ribs cracked in protest. Blood rushed to my ears, drowning out the hum of the refrigerator, the distant horns on the Boston street below, the whole world collapsing into the cold light of those words. My house. The one thing I had scraped and saved for working double skipping vacations, watching everyone else in my family treat me like I was invisible. Gone. Sold while I was hundreds of miles away, moving witnesses between safe houses, believing that at least the little slice of stability I had left in the world was untouchable. The walls of my apartment seemed to press in closer, the air too thick to breathe. I swung my legs off the bed feet, pressing into the rough carpet, as if grounding myself against the absurdity. I dialed my voicemail in shaking disbelief, praying it was some sick joke. Instead, my mother's voice filled the darkness, calm and syrupy. "Lauren, honey, you've been so busy. We still had your power of attorney from when you were 19. You left it with us, remember? We thought, why not make use of it? You're hardly ever home, and Victoria's big day is coming. Family helps family." She even laughed. Laughed, as if she hadn't just ripped my lungs out of my body with one sentence. I clutched the phone so hard the plastic creaked. A sour taste flooded my mouth, metallic and sharp. Memories whipped through my mind like a cruel montage. Birthdays skipped because Victoria had recitals my college acceptance brushed aside, while my sister got a new BMW, my parents' favorite phrase whenever I dared to ask why. "Don't be dramatic, Lauren." And now they had used a scrap of paper signed when I was barely an adult to erase the only thing I had built for myself. My heart thudded painfully against my ribs, every beat like a hammer on steel. But there was something even worse gnawing at the edge of my mind, a shadow I couldn't ignore. My house wasn't just a house. It was one of the designated properties flagged under witness protection. A safe haven, quiet, strategically placed, never meant to be touched. The realization crashed over me like ice water. By selling it, they hadn't just betrayed me. They had compromised a federal safe house. The protection of a witness's life now hung in the balance because my parents wanted champagne fountains and a designer gown for their golden child. My phone buzzed again, 20 notifications piling up, calls, texts, my sister's name flashing across the screen. I let it ring into the void bile rising in my throat. The betrayal was total. My family had finally crossed the line between selfishness and crime. And whether I liked it or not, I would be the one forced to pick up the pieces. My name is Lauren Mitchell, 28 years old, deputy with the U.S. Marshals Service assigned to the Witness Protection Division. On paper, I wear a badge, carry a firearm, and move ghosts of people from one life to another. In reality, I have spent my entire existence fighting a different kind of invisibility, the kind stamped on me by my own family. Growing up in Cambridge, Massachusetts, our little townhouse smelled constantly of lemon polish and my mother's Chanel perfume. To neighbors, we were the perfect family. Robert Mitchell respected, accountant Helen Mitchell, always immaculate in pearls, and their two daughters, Victoria and Lauren. But behind closed doors, it was clear who mattered. Victoria, my sister, 4 years older, was the golden child. She was paraded at every dinner party, her trophies displayed on every shelf, her photo covering every wall. When she turned 18, Dad surprised her with a BMW 3 Series blue metallic wrapped in a bow the size of a beach ball. The same week I turned 14. My gift was a card with $50 and the words, "Don't spend it all in one place." I never forgot the sting of that moment, the way my smile faltered while Victoria shrieked in delight in the driveway. That night, when I asked quietly why things were always so different for us, Mom's nails clicked against her wine glass and she said, "Don't be dramatic, Lauren." Be grateful. Gaslighting was the family language. Every time I achieved something honor roll debate team captain, later my college scholarship, it was brushed aside. My parents would nod politely, then change the subject to Victoria's modeling, Victoria's boyfriends, Victoria's internships. Even when I graduated top of my class in criminal justice, they didn't come to the ceremony. They were in Florida touring wedding venues for my sister's first engagement. I learned early not to expect applause. That lack of recognition carved a hollow in me, but it also fueled me. While Victoria was handed everything, I hustled. I worked 3 jobs in college, pulled graveyard shifts at the diner, studied on break. When I applied for the Marshal Service, nobody in my family even knew what the process entailed. They assumed I would be filing papers in some dusty office. A desk job suits you, Dad had said, dismissing the months of grueling physical tests, the background checks, the psychological interviews. Even after I was sworn in, badge heavy on my chest, they never asked what my work meant. To them, I was just the spare, the background shadow to Victoria's glow. That is why, when I finally bought my house at 24, 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, a white clapboard in a quiet Boston suburb, I swore it was mine and mine alone. Every brick represented my independence, every nail a rejection of the narrative they had written for me. What my family never understood was that my house was more than shelter. It was a fortress, a lifeline in my work. Selected and approved by the Federal Registry, it became part of the protected network. It wasn't just 4 walls. It was a promise of safety for someone whose life depended on secrecy. And yet to my parents, it was nothing but a convenient asset they could liquidate for my sister's perfect wedding. They never saw me as more than a spare daughter with spare things. That night, staring at the glowing texts on my phone, I realized something I had spent my whole life denying. The same pattern of favoritism and dismissal had finally escalated into outright betrayal, and the cost would not only be mine to pay, it could cost an innocent life. The next morning, after pacing my apartment until sunrise, I finally forced myself to call home. My mother answered on the first ring, her tone infuriatingly cheerful, as though she'd been waiting for me to grovel. "Lauren, sweetheart, don't sound so upset. We did what had to be done. You're never around, always working those mysterious late nights." The house was sitting there gathering dust. At least now it serves a real purpose. I nearly dropped the phone. A real purpose. You sold a federally protected property. Do you have any idea what you've done? Silence. Then her sigh, sharp and patronizing. "Always with the dramatics. You've been like this since you were a child. Victoria's wedding is around the corner. She deserves a proper start, a beautiful home, a chance to build her family. Isn't that what good sisters want?" The words slashed through me, a script I had heard all my life. Victoria deserves, Lauren adapts. I clenched my jaw until it hurt, remembering the card table I used to do homework on in the kitchen, while Victoria got her own study desk with a lamp shaped like a princess crown. Even as adults, the narrative hadn't changed. My sacrifices were obligations, her indulgences were investments. I demanded details, my voice breaking with fury. My father took the phone from her, his baritone steady as if reciting a business transaction. "We had your power of attorney, Lauren, dated and notarized when you were 19. That gave us every right to act on your behalf. We found a buyer willing to close fast, cash in hand, $1.3 million. A very good deal considering the market." I almost choked. $1.3 million. The property had last been appraised at $2.8. They had sold it for less than half its value. "You didn't just sell my house," I spat. "You handed it away to criminals at a discount. Do you even realize who you sold it to?" But of course they didn't. They never asked. They saw a check and they saw their golden daughter's perfect day. "Don't you dare talk to us like that," my father snapped. "We did this for family. Victoria's future matters more than a piece of real estate you barely used." The call ended with my mother whispering in the background, "Don't ruin this for her, Lauren. Don't be selfish now." The words echoed in my skull long after the line went dead. I stared at the silent phone bile rising in my throat. Selfish. I had given up birthdays, holidays, even relationships for this job. I lived out of suitcases, ate gas station sandwiches at 2 a.m., and spent nights guarding witnesses who had no one else to trust. And my family had the audacity to call me selfish because I wanted to keep the one thing I had earned, the one thing that gave me both safety and purpose. I pulled up property records, hands trembling on the keyboard. The deed transfer had already been filed. Mitchell Family Trust to Red Haven LLC. The ink was still fresh digital timestamps less than 12 hours old. I clicked through registries, my stomach sinking with each new document. Red Haven LLC was a shell company incorporated in Delaware, its listed manager connected to 3 other entities already under investigation for laundering money through construction fronts. The sale wasn't just reckless, it was catastrophic. My parents had sold a federal safe house to a group with mafia ties. 25 missed calls buzzed across my screen, my sister's name flashing again and again. I refused to answer. But one voicemail transcribed itself in cruel clarity, Victoria's voice, sugary and triumphant. Finally. We don't have to keep begging Dad for loans. Thanks for contributing, sis. My wedding is going to be unforgettable. Oh, and don't bother coming if you're going to pout. It's supposed to be a happy day. My vision blurred with rage. This wasn't just betrayal. It was obliteration. They had carved my backbone out and handed it over as a dowry. And worse, they had put innocent lives in jeopardy to fund their champagne fountains and designer gowns. My fingers hovered over my boss's number. Reporting your own family was the last line I had never imagined crossing. But after this, there was no choice left. The betrayal was absolute. The law would decide their fate now. By the time I walked into the marshal's service office later that morning, the fluorescent lights felt harsher than usual, buzzing above my head like hornets. My badge felt heavier on my hip, the weight of obligation pressing into my ribs. I went straight to my supervisor's office, Supervisory Deputy Marshal Denise Carter, a woman who had spent 25 years in the service and could smell panic before you opened your mouth. She didn't even look up from the files on her desk when she said, "Mitchell, sit." "You look like hell." I sat, hands gripping my knees so tightly the fabric of my slacks pulled taut. "Ma'am," I said, voice shaking despite myself. "I need to report a breach. My family, they sold my house." She finally looked up, brows knitting. "Your house? You mean the residence on the registry?" I nodded once, and the silence that followed felt like a noose tightening around my throat. Denise stood so fast, her chair skidded back. "Do you understand what this means? That property is on our protected list. Witnesses cycle through there. Who signed the sale?" I swallowed hard, shame and rage twisting together in my gut. My parents. They used an old power of attorney from when I was 19. They said it was for my sister's wedding. They think it's just real estate. Her eyes narrowed, sharp and furious. They didn't sell a house, Mitchell. They sold federal property. That's tampering. That's obstruction. That's a potential endangerment of life. This is not a family squabble anymore. She yanked her phone off the desk, barking orders into it within seconds. "Get me legal. Get me cyber. I want eyes on that deed transfer now." The room filled with a whirlwind of movement. Files slammed shut. Calls were placed. Within minutes, the federal attorney on duty was patched in. His voice was crisp, no nonsense. "Deputy Mitchell, your parents' action constitutes misuse of a legal instrument and unlawful disposal of federal property. The sale is voidable, but if the buyers are connected to organized crime, we're in federal offense territory. We'll need immediate asset freeze orders." I wanted to vomit. My parents thought they were helping their golden child plan a wedding, and instead, they had walked headfirst into conspiracy and fraud charges. Denise shot me a look as if to ground me in reality. "This isn't on you," she said quietly. "You didn't sign those papers." They did, but it didn't feel like enough to absolve me. The blood in my veins felt electric, every nerve screaming that I had failed not only as a daughter but as an officer sworn to protect. By noon, the investigation was already in motion. Cyber analysts confirmed the sale had gone through Red Haven LLC, a shell company connected to 3 laundering fronts under FBI scrutiny. Treasury flagged the $1.3 million transfer, and a freeze was placed within the hour. A court motion was being drafted to invalidate the sale and reclaim the deed. But the damage was already bleeding outward. Denise leaned across her desk, voice low but firm. "You understand what comes next, right? We'll have to pull the witness from that location immediately. You'll be reassigned to the case until the threat level drops. And Mitchell, this won't just stay in the service. Your family will be investigated. There will be charges. Her words hammered into me harder than any blow my sister had ever landed, harder than every insult my parents had thrown across the years. They weren't just selfish anymore. They were criminals, and the machine of federal justice had already started grinding forward unstoppable. I nodded, forcing air into my lungs, my voice a whisper, then let it grind. By dusk that same day, I was in the back of a black government SUV heading toward the house I had once called my sanctuary. The city lights of Boston flickered past, then gave way to quieter streets lined with elms and maples, already shedding their October leaves. The vehicle's cabin smelled of leather and gun oil, a smell I had grown used to, though tonight it turned my stomach. My heart slammed against my ribs with every turn we took closer to the address I had memorized in my bones. When we pulled onto the familiar street, my chest tightened. The house sat there, white clapboard siding, glowing pale in the twilight, but it no longer looked like mine. The front door hung slightly ajar, a strip of yellow light spilling onto the porch. Denise, seated beside me, raised a hand, and two marshals moved in, first weapons drawn. My palms sweated against my thighs, every nerve screaming that something had been violated. Inside, the smell hit me first. It wasn't the faint lavender I used to spray after cleaning, but stale cigarette smoke and the acrid bite of cheap cologne. Furniture had been moved, my grandmother's oak sideboard shoved against the wall drawers ransacked. The locks on the back door were splintered, the security cameras disconnected and dumped on the floor like broken toys. My chest burned as I stepped through the living room, my boots crunching on glass from a shattered lamp. This was no longer a safe house. It was compromised ground. One of the marshals motioned me toward the dining room. There on the table lay an open ledger, handwritten notes, and Cyrillic phone numbers, amounts that stretched into 6 figures. Denise scanned it, her lips tightening. This isn't just sloppy. They were using the property as a temporary stash site. Someone moved fast after the sale. I gripped the back of a chair so hard my knuckles whitened. My parents had no idea what they'd done, or maybe they didn't care enough to ask. To them, it was just real estate. To us, it was evidence that lives were now in danger. We checked the upstairs rooms. The spare bedroom where I had once slept during renovations now had duffel bags lined against the wall, unmarked heavy. A marshal slit one open with a knife, revealing bundles of cash bound in rubber bands, the sour ink smell unmistakable. Another bag contained burner phones, SIM cards still in their wrappers. Denise's voice was steady, but her eyes burned with restrained fury. This seals it. Organized crime. Your family handed them a federal sanctuary for pocket change. My knees threatened to buckle. Images of witnesses I had escorted, trembling families clutching bags of clothes as we relocated them, flashed through my mind. What if one of them had been here just a day longer? What if their cover had been blown because of this betrayal? Downstairs, neighbors peeked from across the street, eyes wide, as black SUVs and agents swarmed the property. One elderly woman clutched her robe tighter and whispered, I thought I saw men moving in last night. Didn't look like your family. My throat closed. She was right. Nothing about this belonged to my family anymore. They had signed away my security, my dignity, and unknowingly placed a target on the back of a protected witness. As the last agents carried evidence bags to the SUVs, Denise put a hand on my shoulder, her grip firm, grounding. Mitchell, listen to me. This isn't just personal anymore. We have probable cause. We have criminal activity on federal property. The buyers are linked to organized crime. Your family's signatures are on the documents. This will end in indictments. Her words rang like a bell, tolling final judgment. I stared at the house one last time, the porch light flickering, the siding peeling just slightly where the autumn air bit into it. It was no longer my house. It was a crime scene. And my family had lit the match that burned everything down. Back at headquarters, the evidence board filled quickly printouts of the deed, transfer bank records, photographs from the house, all pinned under harsh fluorescent light. I sat in the corner, still in my field jacket, watching as my private world became a federal case file. Every detail felt like a nail sealing my family's coffin, and yet I couldn't look away. The first discovery came from cyber. Red Haven LLC wasn't just any shell company. Its listed manager, a man named Viktor Kravchenko, had been flagged in an FBI intelligence report 6 months earlier. ties to a New Jersey construction firm suspected of laundering drug money, offshore accounts in Cyprus, phone records connecting him to known associates in the Russian mob. My stomach turned as I read the names. This wasn't theoretical. This was organized crime with teeth. Then came the money trail. Treasury agents pulled the wire logs $1.3 million deposited from Red Haven into the Mitchell Family Trust. Within 48 hours, $800,000 was siphoned into a joint account held by my sister Victoria and her fiancé, Ethan Cross. The same Ethan who strutted around family gatherings with tailored suits and a smug grin bragging about his entrepreneurial ventures. Turns out one of those ventures was siphoning blood money straight into a wedding fund. I felt the bile rise as the numbers lit up on the screen. They weren't just guilty by accident. They were beneficiaries of crime. My family had sold out my house, my career, and a federal witness's safety, all for floral arrangements and champagne fountains. Legal analysts weighed in next. The use of an outdated power of attorney to transfer protected property fell under misuse of a legal instrument fraud and conspiracy. But because the property was in the witness protection network, it escalated. The assistant U.S. attorney spelled it out in cold surgical language. This qualifies as obstruction of justice and potentially witness tampering. If intent is proven, it's a Class C felony. Maximum 20 years. I pressed my palms into my eyes, the fluorescent lights burning behind my lids. 20 years. My parents, who once scolded me for forgetting to unload the dishwasher, had stumbled into crimes that carried the weight of decades. Victoria, who used to steal my clothes and laugh when I cried, now stood to face charges that could rip away her freedom entirely. Denise's voice cut through the static in my head. "Evidence never blinks," she said, firmly tapping the board. Signatures transfers timestamps. They can cry family loyalty all they want, but the paper trail doesn't lie. That phrase hit me like a gavel. Evidence never blinks. It never favors one child over the other. It never gaslights. It simply reveals. Agents compiled more emails between Ethan and Victoria discussing the windfall. A text from my mother bragging to her bridge club about finally putting that empty house to good use. Every message was another blade carving deeper into me. For years, I had told myself the favoritism was just emotional neglect, survivable. But now I saw it clearly. It was a pattern, a disease. The same blindness that made them ignore my achievements had led them to ignore federal law. In their eyes, Victoria's desires were worth more than my dignity, my home, even the safety of strangers. The board was nearly full when Denise looked at me. "We'll need you on the relocation detail. The witness has to be moved tonight. The house is compromised, and until we indict the buyers are still active." I knotted my throat tight. Duty first always. But beneath the steel of my oath, something raw clawed inside me. This wasn't just about saving a witness anymore. This was about exposing the rot in my own bloodline. As the agents packed up the files, I caught my reflection in the glass of the evidence board. My face looked older, harder, carved by betrayal. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like the overlooked child. I felt like the executioner of my family's illusions, and the blade I carried was the law. Night had already swallowed the city when we rolled out in a two-vehicle convoy, headlights off, engines humming low. I sat in the back seat beside a trembling woman clutching a backpack to her chest. She was our witness, early 30s, eyes darting like a hunted animal, her whole life stuffed into that worn canvas bag. She had no idea that hours earlier her safe house had been sold out from under her by my own flesh and blood. The SUV moved like a ghost through side streets, every turn pre-planned, every traffic camera avoided. My hand rested on the Glock at my hip, not out of paranoia, but instinct. If the buyers had already scoped out the property, they could have clocked her face. One leak, and this convoy could become a target. She whispered, voice barely audible over the rumble of tires. Was I compromised? The question sliced into me. My jaw tightened before I forced a steady tone. "You're safe now. We're moving you to another location. No one will find you there." But the guilt pulsed hot beneath my skin. She didn't need to know the betrayal hadn't come from strangers or informants. It had come from my parents and my sister people who should have protected me and, by extension, her. Denise's voice crackled in my earpiece from the lead car. "Mitchell status." "Secure," I answered, eyes scanning the dark streets. Witness calm, convoy intact. She didn't reply right away. Then, "Good. Keep it that way. This doesn't end until we put cuffs on the right people. The relocation took hours weaving through back roads until the city lights faded and the Massachusetts countryside swallowed us whole. Finally, we reached a secluded farmhouse retrofitted with reinforced doors, security cameras, and emergency comms. The witness was escorted inside by 2 agents. I stayed back on the porch, the night air biting at my lungs, staring out into the black fields beyond. For the first time in years, I wanted to cry. Not from fear, not from exhaustion, but from the unbearable weight of betrayal pressing down on my chest. I had carried fugitives, murderers, terrified families through the dark, but nothing compared to the feeling of knowing my own blood had endangered this woman's life. When Denise stepped onto the porch, she handed me a file thick with documents. Mitchell, listen carefully. We've confirmed the funds moved into Victoria's account. The buyers knew exactly what they were purchasing. That means your family can't plead ignorance. They're looking at charges that could bury them. Her words were steady, merciless. I gripped the file so tightly, the paper edges cut into my skin. What happens now? I asked. We build the case. We gather every shred of evidence, and when the time is right, we take them down publicly. They wanted a spectacle for Victoria's wedding fine. We'll give them one. In front of everyone. The idea of confronting my family at my sister's wedding, a ballroom packed with relatives, cameras, reporters, sent a chill down my spine. But beneath the chill, something hotter flickered. Justice, retribution. The kind of justice that didn't just balance scales but smashed them down for everyone to see. I closed the file, my voice low but sharp. Then I'll be there. If they turned my house into a crime scene, I'll turn their wedding into a courtroom. Denise gave a single nod, her eyes hard as steel. Good. Evidence never blinks, Mitchell, and neither do we. As the night pressed heavy around us, I realized the line had been crossed permanently. There was no going back to awkward Sunday dinners or polite family phone calls. My parents, my sister, they weren't just the people who had overlooked me my whole life. They were now federal suspects. And I was the witness who would help put them behind bars. The ballroom glittered like a cathedral of excess. Chandeliers threw shards of light across polished marble floors, and every table sagged under centerpieces of imported orchids and roses. Waiters in black vests balanced trays of champagne flutes, while a string quartet filled the air with something elegant and hollow. To the guests, this was the wedding of the season. To me, it was an active crime scene disguised in silk and lace. I stood just inside the towering doors, my badge heavy under my blazer, flanked by 2 marshals in plain suits. Denise was a step behind me, her eyes sharp as glass. My pulse pounded in my ears, but my voice was steady when I said, "Showtime." Victoria glided across the ballroom in her gown, white sequins catching every shard of light, her smile wide as a billboard. She looked like a queen stepping onto her throne, utterly unaware that her empire had already been built on sand. At her side, Ethan beamed a man drunk on the illusion of untouchable wealth. My parents hovered near the head table, basking in borrowed glory, whispering to guests about how proud they were. My stomach twisted so violently I thought I might collapse. Denise gave a subtle nod. I stepped forward, heels clicking like gunshots against the marble. Conversations dipped eyes, turning champagne glasses pausing mid-air. My voice cut through the music. This wedding is over. The quartet faltered to silence, heads whipped toward me, some faces confused, others already hungry for scandal. My mother's jaw dropped, her hand flying to her pearls. "Lauren!" she hissed, horror painted on her face. "What on earth are you doing?" I ignored her. I reached into my blazer and pulled out a folder thick with documents. By order of the United States Marshals Service and the U.S. Attorney's Office, this event is now under federal investigation. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Someone dropped a glass. It shattered across the marble. Victoria's smile froze, then twisted into a sneer. "Are you insane? You can't just barge in here and ruin my wedding." "Oh, I said, snapping open the folder. And I will. Because this entire celebration is funded by criminal proceeds. Because you and Ethan took $800,000 from Red Haven LLC, a shell company tied to organized crime. Because our family." My voice cracked, but I pressed on. "Sold a federally protected safe house to your buyers. You endangered a witness's life for champagne fountains and a designer gown." The room erupted. Whispers cascaded like falling dominoes. Federal witness protection. Is she serious? Oh my God, mob money. Ethan's face drained of color. He stammered, "That's ridiculous. We didn't know." Denise cut him off, her tone surgical. "Ignorance is not a defense under federal law. You accepted funds knowingly tied to an illegal transfer. That makes you complicit." My father pushed forward, face red with fury. "Lauren, stop this madness right now. This is your sister's day. You've always been jealous." The old script. The same gaslighting recycled like cheap wallpaper. But tonight, I wasn't the invisible daughter anymore. I raised my voice, every syllable sharp enough to cut glass. Jealousy didn't put blood money in Victoria's account. Jealousy didn't forge my signature on a power of attorney. Jealousy didn't sell a federal property to the mob. That was you, all of you. The words cracked like a whip, silencing even the whispers. Denise gave a subtle signal. 2 marshals stepped forward, producing handcuffs. Gasps became shrieks as Victoria stumbled back, her sequined gown catching under her heels. "You can't do this!" she screamed, thrashing as the agents seized her wrists. "I'm the victim here. This is my wedding." "No," Denise said coldly. "This is your indictment." The guests surged back, phones raised, flashes sparking like lightning. My mother sobbed openly, clutching my father's arm. My father shouted, "You'll regret this, Lauren. You're destroying your own family." My hands trembled, but my voice stayed steel. Family destroyed itself the moment it crossed the line from favoritism into federal crime. As Victoria was dragged past me, mascara streaking down her cheeks, she spat, "You'll never be better than me. Never." I met her glare, my heart a furnace of grief and justice intertwined. Evidence never blinks, Victoria, and today neither do I. The ballroom was chaos, guests scattering, waiters, frozen cameras flashing, but in the center of the storm for the first time in my life, I stood unshaken. The overlooked daughter had become the one who delivered the final verdict. The ballroom still buzzed with chaos when Denise set the final nail into the coffin. She slid a small recorder onto the head table, pressing play. A tinny voice filled the room, Victoria's clear and unmistakable. "Psst. Don't worry, Ethan. With Lauren's old POA, it's like taking candy from a child. Mom and Dad will sign whatever we put in front of them. Once the house is sold, we'll have the cash. And the best part, Lauren will never see it coming. She's too busy playing cop to notice." The recording ended with her laugh sharp and cruel. Gasps cut through the crowd like knives. Every pair of eyes turned on my sister, who froze in her sequined gown, face draining of all color. She had just incriminated herself in front of 200 witnesses. My mother's sobs grew louder, her body shaking as she stared at Victoria. You forged those papers." Her voice cracked. "You told us Lauren wanted this." For the first time, my father looked unsure. His anger flickered into something like horror as the truth clawed its way in. "Victoria," he whispered, as though saying her name might somehow erase the evidence. But the avalanche had already started. Denise pulled another file from her case, flipping it open for the cameras that now swarmed. Handwriting analysis confirms the POA signature was forged. Phone records place Victoria in contact with Red Haven LLC's broker weeks before the sale. And here, she tapped a printed email, is written proof she directed the funds into her own account, not her parents'. This wasn't naivety. This was premeditated fraud. The room seemed to tilt. My knees threatened to buckle, but adrenaline held me upright. I had suspected my parents' blindness, their endless favoritism, but even I hadn't dared imagine the full scope of Victoria's manipulation. She hadn't just been handed everything she had stolen, lied, and orchestrated the downfall of her own blood to maintain her crown. Victoria shook her head wildly, mascara smearing. "No, that's not what happened, Ethan. Tell them we were just trying to—" But Ethan had already stepped back, his hands raised as if distancing himself from a fire. "I didn't know about the forgery," he stammered, sweat glistening on his forehead. "She told me her family approved everything. I thought it was legitimate." The betrayal on Victoria's face was almost grotesque. For once, she was the overlooked one, her fiancé, throwing her to the wolves as easily as she had thrown me her whole life. The guests murmured, a sea of judgmental faces whispering poison. She forged documents. She dragged her parents into this. My God, the arrogance. Denise's voice cut clean through the noise. "Victoria Mitchell, You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, forgery of legal documents, and obstruction of justice related to a federal property. You have the right to remain silent, Victoria screamed, thrashing against the marshal's grip. No, this isn't fair. This was supposed to be my day. I stepped closer, my voice low enough for only her to hear. It is your day, Victoria. The day the truth finally caught up. Her eyes burned into mine, but I saw it then. The panic, the terror of someone who had always been adored and excused, suddenly realizing there would be no escape. As they dragged her toward the exit, my parents stood rooted in place, their perfect facade collapsing. My mother's lipstick smeared her pearls trembling in her hands. "What have we done?" she whispered. The answer was written across every shocked face in that room. They had raised a golden child so entitled she thought the law bent for her. And now the law was bending her into shackles. The twist was complete. It wasn't just betrayal of me. It was betrayal of them too. And for the first time in my life, the scales didn't tip in Victoria's favor. They slammed down, crushing her throne to dust. The courthouse smelled of old wood and disinfectant, the kind of place where truth gets stripped bare, whether you're ready or not. Weeks after the wedding raid, I sat behind the government's table not as a defendant or a witness in hiding, but as the officer who had delivered the evidence. My badge gleamed on my belt, my pulse steady even as my heart bruised itself against my ribs. Victoria entered in shackles, her sequined wedding gown traded for an orange jumpsuit that looked like it had been designed to erase people. Her hair was limp makeup, long gone, eyes hollowed out by sleepless nights. She tried to meet my gaze across the courtroom, but I didn't flinch. She had spent her life stealing my spotlight today. I refused to give her even a flicker of acknowledgement. The prosecutor laid out the charges like bricks stacking into a wall forgery of legal documents, conspiracy to commit fraud, obstruction of justice, witness tampering. Each one carried weight measured in years, not months. When the wire transfers and the recorded phone calls were played for the jury, I saw the last fragments of denial crumble from my parents' faces in the gallery. My father, once so composed, slumped forward, his head in his hands. My mother clutched a tissue so tightly it shredded in her grip, mascara bleeding down her cheeks. For the first time, they weren't blaming me, weren't gaslighting, weren't covering for their golden child. They were watching her empire of favoritism collapse into rubble piece by piece. The defense tried to paint Victoria as naive, manipulated by Ethan, swept up in the fantasy of wedding planning. But Ethan himself had turned testifying under immunity. His words landed like gunfire. She told me she had the authority. She forged her sister's signature. She said her parents would sign anything for her. I thought it was all just family business. The jury didn't buy the Innocence Act, not when they saw the receipts of $800,000 funneled into a joint account, not when they heard her laughter on the recording about taking candy from a child. When the verdict came, it felt like the air was sucked out of the room. Guilty, on all counts. The judge, a man with a voice like stone, grinding against stone, didn't bother with theatrics. He read the sentence with precision. Victoria Mitchell, for your role in the forgery, fraud, and obstruction of justice involving a federally protected property, this court sentences you to 8 years in federal prison. The gasp from the gallery was audible. My mother collapsed into my father's arms. My father didn't comfort her. He just stared blankly ahead as if every decision of favoritism, every indulgence he had ever granted Victoria, had now turned to ash in his mouth. 8 years. Not probation, not a slap on the wrist. 8 years of bars and steel doors and no silk gowns to soften the edges. For once in her life, my sister had received exactly what she deserved. But the gavel didn't stop with her. My parents weren't charged with conspiracy, but they weren't spared either. The judge issued a civil penalty for misuse of power of attorney, a staggering fine that gutted their savings. The family trust was frozen, their reputation in ruins. Friends stopped calling neighbors, whispered behind drawn curtains. As the marshals led Victoria out of the courtroom in cuffs, she screamed over her shoulder, "This isn't over, Lauren. You think you've won. You'll regret this." Her words didn't pierce me. They dissolved before they reached my skin. Because in that moment, watching the golden child led away to prison, I realized something I had waited my whole life to feel. I wasn't the overlooked daughter anymore. I was the one who stood when it mattered, the one who chose truth over blood. And the law, cold, impartial, unblinking, had chosen me back. The weeks after sentencing felt surreal, like walking through the ruins of a house I once lived in but no longer recognized. My phone, once buzzing with family group texts about birthdays and holiday dinners, lay silent on the counter. No calls from Mom begging me to forgive Victoria. No half-hearted apologies from Dad, trying to smooth things over. Silence had become my new inheritance. The neighborhood where I grew up turned cold. Old friends of my parents crossed the street rather than meet my eyes. Their once flawless reputation had curdled into a warning whispered in grocery store aisles, the Mitchells, the family who sold out their own daughter's house and landed in federal court. The bridge club my mother used to brag to abandoned her. The church pews where they once sat near the front were now empty, their absence louder than any sermon. One night, my father called from a blocked number. His voice was brittle, stripped of its usual authority. "Lauren," he said, "we never meant for it to go this far. We thought we were helping Victoria like we always did. We didn't see what she was doing." I closed my eyes, the weight of decades pressing down. "That's the point, Dad. You never saw. You never wanted to. You made me invisible so she could shine." There was a pause, a sharp inhale. For once, he didn't argue. He didn't call me dramatic. He just whispered, "I'm sorry," and hung up. It was the first apology I had ever heard from him, and it landed too late to matter. My mother tried once too, sending a letter written in her tight, elegant script. It rambled between guilt and self-defense, ending with a plea. "Please don't abandon us, you're all we have left." I didn't respond. Because the truth was, I had already been abandoned long before this, every birthday forgotten, every achievement dismissed, every boundary crossed. This trial hadn't ended my family. It had only revealed the corpse that had been rotting for years beneath the glossy exterior. As for Victoria, prison stripes replaced her crown. Gossip columns picked up the story, delighting in the fall of the Golden Daughter, her mugshot splashed across tabloids where once her engagement photos had been. Ethan vanished into obscurity, his immunity deal protecting him from charges, but not from disgrace. And me, I walked through it all with a strange calm. For the first time, I wasn't fighting to be seen or begging for scraps of recognition. I was simply standing in the clear light of truth. I knew reconciliation wasn't coming. The family I had once tried so desperately to please had dismantled itself. The fallout wasn't a tragedy anymore, it was liberation. I had carried their weight for 28 years. Now, at last, I could set it down. The day Victoria was transferred to federal prison, I drove past the old neighborhood one last time. The maple trees still lined the street, golden leaves drifting down in the autumn air, but nothing felt the same. My parents' house sat dark curtains drawn the once manicured lawn, now overgrown. The silence around it was louder than any words they could have said to me. I pulled over near the corner, staring at the window of my old bedroom. For years, I had begged for their attention, begged to be seen. Now I realized the truth. Sometimes the only way to protect yourself is to stop begging and start drawing boundaries no one can cross. At work, the witness I had relocated wrote me a thank you letter. Just a single page, her handwriting shaky but heartfelt. "You kept me alive when your own family put me in danger." I'll never forget that. I folded it carefully and placed it in my desk drawer. The words, a reminder that my worth had never been measured by my parents' approval, but by the lives I had chosen to protect. I didn't forgive them, not yet, maybe not ever. But I stopped carrying the shame of their choices. They had tried to call it family loyalty. The truth was uglier. It had been greed, favoritism, and blindness dressed up as love. And love without respect, without accountability, isn't love at all. One evening, sitting alone in my small apartment with its chipped walls and humming refrigerator, I poured myself a glass of wine and let the quiet settle around me. For the first time, it didn't feel like loneliness. It felt like peace. Because the golden child was gone, the gaslighting silenced the betrayal carved into a legal record that could never be erased. And me, I was still standing, stronger, clearer, finally free. Family isn't a license to exploit. Family isn't a shield from the law. And family certainly isn't defined by who gets the bigger piece of cake at the table. It's defined by respect, by honesty, by accountability. Without those, it's just strangers sharing blood. So if you're listening to this wondering if it's selfish to draw a line, Hear me clearly, it isn't. Boundaries aren't betrayal. Sometimes they're the only form of survival left. Tell me, have you ever been overlooked, betrayed, or gaslighted by the people who were supposed to protect you? Share your story in the comments. And if you want to hear more stories where betrayal meets justice, don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and tell me where you're watching from. Because justice may be slow, but as I learned in that courtroom, evidence never blinks. And neither should you.